My name is Colin Hughes and I'm head of the Graduate Business School here at TU Dublin. And I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Rob Piercy, head of sales at Learn-A-Pon, and Paul O'D, who's managing director at Select Strategies. So we're really excited about this evening's event, and it's all about scaling and with a particular emphasis on scaling sales. So the format is we have a couple of questions that we've invited in advance. So I'm going to direct a couple of questions at Paul and at Rob, and then we're going to open it up for a general Q&A at the end. So if you do have questions, please chat them, pop them into the chat function as we go. So just to do a little bit of an introduction for those of you who haven't read the bios. So Rob is head of sales at Learn-A-Pon. He's about 20 years in the tech industry, the tech sector, has worked in a number of organizations, including Dell, Qualtrics, and now Learn-A-Pon. And interestingly, TU Dublin and Learn-A-Pon do a lot of work together across a number of different programs. So it's a very strong partnership there. Paul is founder and managing director of Select Strategies, an organization that works with CEOs to help organizations scale. He's founded and exited successfully a number of tech startups. He sits on a number of boards and is an adjunct or guest lecturer in a number of universities, including Stanford, Cambridge, and of course TU Dublin for many, many years. Paul has just authored his third book with his colleague Emer O'Donnell, The Growth Roadmap. It's the third of your books that I've read, so you're probably near the top of my list for authors at this stage. And a fantastic book that we're going to delve into some of those insights this evening. And we're going to start there, Paul. So within the Growth Roadmap, you talk about 5 stages for successful scaling. And would you just give us a kind of an indication or a quick overview of those stages?
Yeah, delighted to be here. And I know that there's quite a few of the participants here. Some of these messages hopefully will make some sense. So I think when we were writing the book, we were trying to write it as much from experience as possible. And we had, between Emer O'Donnell and I, about 25 years experience working with scaling companies or companies facing the challenge of really trying to scale their businesses. And 5 key themes kept on coming up again and again when we were doing the research for the book. I guess the first was some kind of early diagnosis of what's really happening. And there seemed to be 2 separate groupings of companies that we had seen over the years. One grouping were often a little bit too internal looking, you know, that they may not have been hugely ambitious. They were looking at the business from an internal perspective. And the second group were much more ambitious. They seemed to take a brutal hard look at the facts of where they were, but they had taken a deep diagnosis into where they were, what they needed to fix, and how they needed to scale the business. So I think the first stage really was around a detailed diagnosis or facing the brutal facts. The second part of the growth roadmap that we looked at, and it came through from research, was the companies that seemed to scale really successfully had really strong vision or ambition. It was almost like ambition was the architect for scale for them. They had a real demand for themselves. They weren't satisfied to be a sub 5 million or sub 10 million business. They really had some kind of drive to scale the business or do something internationally and significant. The third factor that seemed to come up a lot of the time was that businesses that scaled really took an overall strategic view. Like for most of us and many of us on this call, we're so busy with the urgent that sometimes it's hard to take away the clutter and focus on the important. And a lot of the companies that scaled successfully seem to balance this bridge between focusing on the important, but also dealing with the urgent. And the fourth part that seemed to be very common in the companies that scaled well was that they were able to pick out the 3 or 4 big scaling challenges and really nail them. And one of the themes that came through again and again was that companies that scaled well went beyond the founder. They didn't just have kind of a super founder, which of course many of them had, or a super founder team, but they built out a leadership team to help scale the business. So there was this focus on a short number of scaling challenges. And finally, then they had a financial or metrics view that In stage 5, we saw companies that built a financial model and got the funding to really scale. So they were a few of the themes that we came across and tried to write about in the book, Colin.
Great, really interesting. And we know that scaling is a difficult thing. And we're here discussing this evening because it's a very popular topic that comes up time and time again. And we know we've no shortage of really innovative, really exciting startups in the Irish landscape. But what are those kind of scaling challenges? What are the kind of top 3 scaling challenges that these organizations face?
Yeah, so I think sometimes founders will say, oh, well, if we could get the funding, or if only this, or only that. I think the first scaling challenge is really to have clarity about what you're trying to do. Like it's easy to be consumed by the next customer or the next product. And of course, those things are really important. But I think the first part is to have an external view of the market. Like ultimately, as Drucker once said, the job of business is to make customers or find customers. So I think the first part is some kind of external in view, rather than being, if you like, consumed with the beauty of the technology product or medtech product that they're building. So first is that external in view, to have some kind of international view from the beginning, setting up with the mindset of being born to scale. So I think that's number 1. The second is to build the capability in the team, so that the capability in the team and the learning in the team is growing. I think there's, and I know Robin's going to talk to this in a bit about Learn Upon, but in successful scaling businesses like Learn Upon, you can probably judge the rate of growth of the company is in parallel to the rate of growth of the founder team, and they're learning. How many of us on the call know a founder, and if you talk to them 10 years ago, they're still telling you the same story as today? They're kind of caught or trapped in the mindset of today. So I think learning is the second part that really is the standout. So startups that learn. And I think then the third is really building capability in a deliberate way. Like when you go to build out sales, not to just assume that it's the same team, but to be able to bring in talent and experienced talent that's going to help you and fit with the culture of the organization.
Okay, so that external view, that learning, I suppose, mindset, if you like, and the capability piece of the wider team. Great. And Robin, just to you from your experience, when we talk about scaling sales in particular, you have a lot of experience working in building sales teams, leading sales teams. What are the key scaling challenges in your experience? What have you faced?
Yeah, and thanks for having us here, by the way, tonight, Colin. It's great to be here with you, Paul, as well. I think, Paul touched on a few of the things there, but I think to go a little level deeper, and just in my experience, because again, I had that phenomenal experience. And by the way, it's a wild ride, like scaling sales teams, from, that kind of incubation period right up to, I suppose, tens, hundreds of people like across the sales organization, but it's tough. I think the number one challenge that, I can share with you and other sales leaders will share is hiring. Like hiring is the number one challenge on all sales leaders' minds. Like, it's the last thing you think about before you go to bed at night. It's the first thing you think about when you get up in the morning. And particularly here in Dublin, like where there is a talent war, like in the sales side of the house, like, because there's hundreds of amazing tech companies here who, have come in from abroad, or even Irish startups like Learn Upon, which has been doing a great job, but everyone's cutting each other up. Sure. And that is the reality today, unfortunately. Like, so hiring is a big challenge. You talked about learning, Paul, very, very relevant as well, because I think that time to production, time to productivity for new hires who are coming on board to any sales team is critical for the success. They want to feel successful. They want to get up and over their quotas early. We put in place like things like ramp quotas purposefully, to make sure that people feel successful. But, for us, it's about enabling them and giving them the right tools for the job and things like that. So hiring is a big thing. You can never overhire. I would always say to any of my sales leaders or any people I've worked with in the past, make sure you account for attrition, it's only around the corner, even if you've got the strongest sales team, it will always happen like so. So hiring is the biggest thing I would say. Culture, you touched on it, Paul, as well. As you scale, like, keeping that culture that maybe the founders have created, and they've hired really good, smart people along the way in the early parts of the journey, keeping that culture alive and fostering that great culture is difficult, because you're bringing in a melting pot of different types of people, different could be languages and things like that as well, and you want to keep that that kind of core culture you've always had, and that is a real challenge, like, but there's ways to help with that. And I actually think bringing in different mixes of people, different mixes of experience, promoting up through say your biz dev organization into sales, like that fosters a really nice culture, like, you can learn from each other. And I think a lot of the learning, to your point, Paul, like a lot of the learning is actually in the room, from people who've come through those different challenges as we've scaled, like, not necessarily just from people who come in with experience.
And it's that culture piece. So obviously culture is one thing when everyone's co-located, right? But we're talking here about international scaling and so on. So you're talking about trying to develop a culture that extends across borders,
Yeah,
and across offices in different locations and different formats and different setups. How do you deal with that?
it's tough. And when I think about the experience I had previous to Learn Upon with Qualtrics, it was American organization. It chose Dublin as its kind of international HQ. I was lucky, like I was employee number 30 here in EMEA. By the time I'd left, like 5.5 years later, there were over 650 employees, like, across 8-9 different locations across EMEA. Very tough. I think the one thing that we fell into the trap of is we thought we could hire people in different countries around EMEA and they'll be fine, whereas they weren't fine. And we found people were leaving, like, within sort of 6 months of being offered a really amazing opportunity, like maybe once in a career type of opportunity, to go and scale a business out, but they were lost, like, and one of the reasons for that is because they didn't have that DNA that comes with being maybe in the HQ here in Dublin. So what we learned, and the things that I'm taking with me into Learn Upon as we scale as well, is that, like, you have to send a landing team. If you're going to go out and you're going to set up offices around different regions and different countries around EMEA or globally, send a landing team, send people who have that DNA, or bring that, say, that leader, that first leader who you're setting up in a different country, bring them over to the HQ, bring them for 6 months if necessary, bring their families, like let them really soak up the culture before they go back there, so that then they know exactly, like, okay, cool, I'm going to go hire, I need to build a big team here. Now I know exactly, like, the type of culture that we're here. And by the way, when we're hiring as hiring managers, like, we look for all these, through all the checks and balances of the interview process. We want to hire, culture first. Obviously, all the smarts, the integrity, and everything comes after that. But so hopefully, do a good job hiring, and that then passes on to them when they're hiring for their teams as well.
Great. Not an easy one. Lots of challenges there within. Just to focus a second on the nature of sales. So even before COVID, the nature of sales was changing. Increased digitalization of sales amongst every part of every business now in terms of digital transformation and so on. Paul, maybe one for you in terms of your experience in working with organizations. How has that change in the nature of sales impacted upon the approach to scaling?
Well, I suppose the first part is that ultimately there are two processes going on. There's the sales process and the part that we're all very familiar with from our organizations, but ultimately it's a buying process. Yeah. And the customer is controlling the buying process, and customers will buy in the way that is easiest for them. So if you take any of us on this call, think of how we used to buy 5 years ago and how we buy today. So that consumer behavior is right in B2B now, and there's lots of stats, and I'm sure Robin would have similar stats as you would yourself, Colin, but the buyer is going increasingly down the buying process before any salesperson has come in.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that COVID has accelerated that. Yeah. So the overlap between marketing and sales is kind of increasingly tight.
Yeah.
So the clarity of the value proposition, if you went back 10 years ago, a salesperson would be able to navigate and understand the buyer's perspective, whereas the sharpness of the value proposition is much more critical now than it was. And then the actual digitization of that journey, whether it be through video or different digital assets, is really important. And probably without taking out the human aspect at all, I suspect that the data and following the data trail right throughout that sales process to understand, well, what is working for us, what's not working, what do we need to tweak, how do we need to accelerate sales velocity. So sales is very much and always was a mix of art and science, but probably the leaning towards science is getting stronger as we go forward. But I'm sure, Robin, you some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, it's one thing I miss is the hustle of the sales floor. Okay, that's something that I think any salesperson out there, sales leader, that will agree. It's like just that walk up, just that learning, that sharing that you can do. Even like come to quarter end, you've got the madness of trying to close your deals. You want to get up to legal, you want to get up to finance. It's like, you got to help me out here, so you miss all of that, right? But you got to adapt, and Paul spoke very eloquently about a lot of the kind of challenges and how people have to pivot. But technology is critical, and we're using that ourselves. We, with Learn Upon, we started with a very small team of salespeople. There was 7 people when I first joined it 18 months ago, 7 account executives, and now we're up to 18, and we'll probably be 22, 23 by the end of this year, thinking about then, putting teams internationally. But that technology kind of brings it all together. Definitely seen a lot of creativity in our biz dev team. Hopefully our sales team are going to get creative like them as well, and get over that hump. But using things like Vidyard, which is a really good tool for selling. I get tons of BDRs hitting me up every day, with Vidyards, and making it very, very personalized, which definitely helps a huge amount, that personalization. Paul's right in terms of, it's a buyer's market. There's so much choice out there now, but also they've done a lot of their research by the time they even decide to hit, request a demo, on your website. The marketing aspect comes down to it. We spend a lot of marketing dollars to try and get in front of the right audiences, the right personas as well. We're fortunate in Learn Upon that actually, up until recently, 100% of our revenues came through inbound. So marketing demand generated activities. It's built a really solid foundation. And I know, Brendan, who's a founder of Learn Upon, had that, that kind of foresight as well, to make sure we got a really strong marketing engine in. So that does help us, but that coupled with the use of the technology is really helping us, but again, I go back to the start, you can't beat the hustle of the sales floor, I'm hoping we're going to get back there, soon.
And it's interesting because if we think about a lot of our graduates go out and work in sales roles, and you mentioned that the wonderful ecosystem now within an Irish perspective, and they go and work in digital or virtual sales roles or inside sales roles. So they don't know any different, right? They've never been in field sales. They've never had the personal engagement piece. So they don't, but there are many people that, when you talk about some of the art form and so on, people want to get in front of people, and that's what they've been comfortable with. And increasingly, I suppose the question will be asked, well, do you need to travel? And why are you traveling? And that will be asked from both sides, I'm sure.
Yeah.
How challenging is that in terms of scaling internationally without boots on the ground, if you like?
Yeah, I think, previously coming to Learn Upon, and by the way, Learn Upon, again, we built a really solid foundation. When I joined, 18 months ago, there were 125 employees in the whole company. Now we're up just touching 250, so it's doubled in that space of time, which is great. And I think pre-COVID, events were a big part of it. We'd have a lot of trade shows that we would attend in the learning industry. They were very successful for us as well. In terms of scaling internationally without those boots on the ground, this is really relevant to me right now, because we've built an amazing sales team here at Learn Upon, but because it's an Irish company, we built it here in Ireland. Okay, that's a natural thing to do. We start small and we build it out. Again, we're up to about 18 AEs now, 2 of which are actually down in Sydney, helping to kind of pop the APAC market. but the remainder are here, okay, and some of them are remote now, like, you know, they're down in Westmeath, or they're in Donegal, or, you know, down in, you know, one of them's moving down to Cork, which is great, and we can allow that flexibility, right? So, but the challenge is really relevant now, because we're getting to a place where Dublin is becoming very crowded. You know, that talent war is very real. 70% of our revenues come through North American markets. So we need to talk the language of the customer, okay? Particularly here in EMEA, you know, we will have to start putting feet on the ground over in, you know, the France's, the Germany's, the, you know, Benelux, Nordics type of regions. But right now it's like I'm actively searching for my first kind of US sales leader, so we can start building a team out there. And we've done a wonderful job, I think, you know, and it starts way before I joined Learn Upon, but like done a wonderful job of being able to service a market which is thousands of miles away from little old Dublin, but done an incredible job of it. Like, you know, taking our first round of funding last year, you know, which is brilliant because it's helped us to go and do a lot of things in this last year. But I think as I look to it now, it's making sure that we hire a great leader, we get them that DNA for Learn Upon, we enable them, we let them, you know, hire, give them autonomy to go hire locally as well. Industry expertise as well, certainly for the LMS market that Learn Upon is in, is going to be critical, because they're going to be remote leader, number one. They have to come with that experience, and number two, they're going to have to hire people with that experience just to make it easier to get into productivity mode, like, you know. So yeah, the challenge is real. You know, these are the things that definitely, you know, are keeping me up at night. But I'm confident we're going to do it, and we're going to build a great business over there too. Like, you know,
fair play. It's a great story, and it's great to see, you know, Irish companies successfully scaling. One great question came in. I thought we had a bunch of really strong questions that came in advance. One question was, when Irish SMEs are looking to scale internationally and they're working with larger organizations and they're going on that journey with them, how do they convince those larger organizations that we can grow with you, we can scale with you, and that our current small size isn't a risk?
Yeah, so it's a typical situation that many, I suppose, early stage or startup companies face when they're scaling. And there are many really good examples that I'm going to lean on, Learn Upon a little bit, and then move into others. I think the game for scaling and credibility with large buyers starts with the founder team or somebody very close to the founder team. So if you were having a conversation with Brendan or Des at the start of Learn Upon, you would have been engaged by them through their knowledge, their intellect, their culture. You would have felt that you weren't being sold to, although I'm quite sure you were being sold to. But you bought the message. And what we have now in Ireland, which is probably, I think, this huge opportunity going forward to build a really big Indigenous industry, is we have a cohort of really good leaders in not all companies, of course, but there is a cohort of really good leaders that stand out on a world stage, and they're able to go into boardrooms, or they're able to go into situations where you have much larger organizations, and by virtue of their experience, their capital, and their engagement, they start to de-risk that process. So I think that's the first piece of de-risking. The second part is they also become known in their sector. So they're building, and Robin used this word nicely earlier, they're building an ecosystem around them so that they're known for being expert in a particular domain. They're not kind of all things to all men, or they're not a mile wide and an inch deep, and they're not trying to, I'm going to be the Irish guy that'll just go and charm. Yes, of course you need to do all that, but they have a level of expertise and dynamism, and they're focused on a particular sweet spot sector and become known for that. And I think there's lots of examples of really good companies now that are starting to do that, but it's about focus, it's about capability, and it's about ambition.
And it's interesting that you mentioned focus, because we had another question about focusing on sweet spot customers. And, you know, sometimes, you know, there's lower hanging fruit, or there's customers you engage at certain times of the journey that may hold you back from scaling? And I know there's some examples in your book on this, and there's that very good Steve Jobs quote around, it's only by saying no that you get to focus on the important things. How big of an issue is that? Maybe to you first, Rob. Be very clear about your sweet spot customers and having that discipline, I suppose, to maybe say no sometimes.
Yeah, it's very important because you can lose a lot of time focusing on the wrong things. And this, I've seen this through, Qualtrics and, more recently to learn upon, but that ability to say no is critical. One thing we've done recently is, again, I talked about just the nature of, how we've grown the business through inbound, okay, and having that great marketing engine behind us. We know we can't sustain that, okay, just throwing more marketing dollars at it, it's not going to get us to where we want to go, right? So we've had to stand up the outbound element now, okay, which can be very daunting, particularly for maybe, half the team now who have never done that before. So it's about enabling them, okay, but we know that we can't get to where we want to go and knock off the milestones that we want to do without doing that. So, building that pipeline is going to be critical for us for the future, So, and it takes multiple different skill sets, to be able to do that, the technology, the enablement, etc. So, yeah, I mean, look, there's again, that myriad of challenges I've already talked about, with regards to that. But yeah, we keep plugging away and making sure that we're putting our best foot forward, because again, that's going to be trying to future-proof the future of the company. Again, we've got investment now through great partners, Summit partners, and at some point in the future they'll be looking for that return on their investment. We know the importance of laying these foundations now to make sure that we can scale that organization out.
And it's interesting because you talk about some of those challenges down to laying certain foundations. Paul, what are the key foundations? Because I know we've discussed this before, and some organizations set up to scale and some don't. So you might talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, I think, and just to acknowledge actually now TU Dublin's role in that scaling for education is and learning, as I mentioned earlier, is a big happen. The international selling program that TU Dublin run with Enterprise Ireland and also product management, all of these skill sets and building capabilities are very important. So no question, capability building is really, really important. The question you raise on sweet spot or being clear about what is your ideal customer, I think that becomes a pretty important piece of the mix. Now, that's not something that can be done academically on a whiteboard or on a flip chart. It's something that needs to happen in reality. But over the years, I've seen many companies locked into a set of customers that may or may not be a good fit for them, but they spend all their energy and resources and best people over here on what I think of sometimes as a sour spot. Whereas if they were really a little bit more disciplined and tried to focus on that set of customers that were an ideal fit for what they do, they would scale a lot more quickly. Yeah. So inadvertently, they can be locked into a system here that is a big inhibitor to growth. Yeah. So I think that kind of strategic direction is number one. You obviously need excellence in delivery, because customers and reputations in this global world that we're in, like there are reviews on various review sites as quickly as somebody uses something. So transparency is much clearer. So you need an extremely strong delivery engine. And sometimes that needs, somebody that has come with a COO or chief operations officer experience that has come from a much larger organization that understands moving from 10, 20, 200, 500 people, that they've been on that journey before. And I think the third element of that scaling foundation is that there's some underlying financial model that, well, it costs us X to acquire a customer, but we can get revenue of 5X for that. And we can scale that through that the financial model actually makes sense. Yeah. Because as Robin has alluded there, investors, whether they're PE or VC or anything else, they'll only invest in a business if there's a financial engine there that makes sense. So I think those three parts, the value proposition and sweet spots, the delivery engine, and that third, that the financials all make sense to scale.
I think just one other thing to to kind of follow on from that as well, is like you're talking about the target markets, even down to the personas. I think, when you talk about saying no to things, it's like, just from the experience that I'm going through right now with Learn Upon, it's like we've done very well in terms of certain types of industries, like, even SaaS companies, like technology companies, professional services, healthcare. We've seen that we've done very well on that in the e-learning space, right? So, and they're looking for an LMS. They want to obviously, have that culture of learning, and they're doing all the learning journeys and learning programs through an LMS. But is that necessarily going to get us to our next milestone and milestones thereafter? Just focusing on those. And when we set up the territories, and we did a great revenue ops manager, Johnny Gainey, super guy, he came in earlier this year, helping us to pull out data from all sorts of places. We've got Salesforce in and the usual tech stack, right? But one of the things we talked long and hard about is now we're setting up territories to actually go focus on target customers, prospects that we want to go and do business with, so we can swim maybe more upmarket into the enterprise space. Because again, with inbound, you're at the mercy of kind of what comes through. With outbound, you can kind of control it a little bit more, and that's kind of where we're going. But maybe we say no to some of those industries and we start focusing on others. And what we're seeing is that maybe industries like associations, or where the Learn Upon use case works very well, is with that kind of membership volunteering type of audience, is something that we need to tap into. We made a decision not to go with public sector and government because we've been there. It's long, cumbersome sales cycles, and not something that we can do at scale yet. Okay, at some point, I know in the future we'll have a full government, NGO, non-profit type of business unit there within the sales org, but for now it's not worth it.
So prioritization of who you're going after and what your sweet spot is, and understanding that, and I suppose that balance between spending all your time customizing to product and so on, developing product for a particular cadre of clients, to the detriment of maybe developing out things that can scale more widely.
I think so. And probably one of the challenges, I guess, when you're looking at scale is, so if you look at previous waves, product differentiation was something, you had strong people differentiation, where increasingly now differentiation is being done across the full business model. And that requires a broader kind of context everywhere, exactly as we're talking about, from customer segment selection through to what kind of client relationships are we going to have? How are we going to get to market? What's the value proposition? And across the whole delivery and partnership ecosystem, as well as the financial. So the founder team or the leadership team increasingly understanding the full business model and that it's cohesive. If you're locked into a customer set, particularly one that has champagne taste and beer money, you get blocked out of creating that overall, if you like, business model. Whereas if you look at all the leaders today, if you just take the tech sector, most of the tech leaders have at their core an underlying business model that has been a scaling engine. And for Irish companies, looking at the business model as much as everything else is a useful way, because it's to understand the full cohesion of the business model as the foundation for scale.
Yeah, really interesting. And when you look at, you talk about that integrated piece, and I know in the book, when you read it, everything kind of fits together. It's not one thing without the other. It's not one without the other four, and so on, and everything has to knit together. But one area, and this is maybe as a final question, and then we'll go to the Q&A. One area you mentioned that I picked up on was about purpose and about the vision piece, and really understanding the why. And the why is being made famous in many ways through Simon Sinek and others who've really built this out, and it's the language that's used in business schools and leadership modules and TED Talks and so on. But how I suppose common is that clear purpose in practice in startups?
Yeah, so Sinek's video, and I suppose the first thing to say about it is there is a lot of data out there that says purpose is important to people. There's no question that's true. And it is also true that coming out the other side of COVID, purpose is even more important, because there are choices that good people have. And those choices are important, and all of the rest. think the big difference on purpose is in indigenous businesses. With all due respect, I kind of find it difficult to be in a multinational of hundreds of thousands and feel the purpose. Now, that may be just me being cynical. So when you think of purpose, I think of indigenous organizations. And as your final question, I'm going to go back to Learn Upon. Purpose for me in a Learn Upon sense was when the whole floor was there and going in to meet Brendan, and he'd be down in the corner and he'd be the person answering the door. He'd be the person making the cup of tea, and you'd ask him, well, how was he? And he'd say he was a bit tired because one of the guys had gotten sick overnight, so he was covering Australia. So he finished the last call in Australia at 3:30. And I asked him a kind of stupid question for me, of course. Said, well, what was the call about? And he tried to explain the technicalities of it. So it kind of lost me. And then Brendan, in his humbleness, said, well, he wasn't sure either. But the customer was happy to hear that they were getting support there. So I think there's a humbleness, there's a respect, and also, as well as that, there's a mission which is deeply foundational, not in a boastful way, but there's an integrity there. And I think that purpose about doing something important is there in a lot of the really good founder teams. You kind of see it in the behaviors and actions rather than somebody shouting from a pulpit about, they're saving the world or whatever. So no, Robin, what's your thought process?
It's good to hear that. And actually, you've got Brendan spot on, and having worked with him now for a little while, he's still very, very humble, and it's nice to have that from a founder. If I can, and those were the days when Brendan and Des were working from their kitchen table and 3:30 in the morning servicing Australia, and look at us now, we're still here in Ireland servicing a US market on 5 to 8 hour time zone differences, and that's a real challenge, but anyway, I think just feeling and hearing you talk about that gives me a big smile, because when I've come from Qualtrics, and you've got a founder like Ryan Smith, for example, who you may or may not know, but he's very much he was Qualtrics' probably best marketing asset, because he could just hold the audience in whatever setting. It could be a little one-to-one, it could be a small customer round table, it could be 10,000 people at a summit up in Utah, and he'd have you hooked, but that was his thing. He was out there in front of everyone. He was the rah-rah shouting from the pulpit, and he got people really engaged that way, and you come to a company, an Irish company like Learn Upon, where Des and Brendan are super humble, highest integrity, they put people before anything else, and it's really nice to be part of that. I've seen both sides of it now, but certainly within the company, when we have a great quarter or we sign a big deal, we celebrate very quietly, and we just kind of get on with the day job, and that's a different kind of culture from what I've been used to, but it's a nice culture in its own right, because you don't have to be that kind of Ryan Smith, if you shouting from the rooftops, you can get the same results, and maybe even better results, from a different type of approach. And I think that's kind of inherent in Learn Upon's culture.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of some of the level 5 leadership stuff, the Jim Collins, the humility being the one of the key attributes of successful leaders in organizations, CEOs that many people had never even heard of, right? And these really high-performing, consistent high-performing organizations. So with many different types of leadership. Folks, that's great. We're gonna pop. We've a couple of questions here, and we've 20 minutes or so for a couple of questions. So first one here from Jer, I think. So I'm interested in hearing some thoughts on linking sales and product strategy when attempting to scale. So what do you see is the key for success from a product perspective to support sales and scaling a business? Whoever wants to take that.
It's a great question. Maybe I'll kick off, Paul, and then you can add your thoughts, but we have a fantastic product team, and we've got a great engineering team, which is based in our tech hub down in Serbia. We have a fantastic head of product. We butt heads a little bit sometimes, but I think that's because just by the very nature of sales, there may be something in our product that a customer or a prospect wants, but we don't do it. And we're there shouting from the roof, hey, look, we'd love to get this enabled and turn this on, it'll unlock all this revenue, etc., etc. But what we have to be very respectful of is the product roadmap. And there's a vision there, you know, I'm sure for every company when it comes to their own product, like, and Learn Upon's no different, but, you know, we have a vision of what we want to do. We have a vision of like what we don't want to do, who we don't want to become, if you like, maybe a competitor or two.
Yeah.
So we're plowing our own kind of furrow, if you like, and that's fine. And, you know, Learn Upon LMS will serve, you know, hundreds of thousands of organizations around the globe at one point in the future. But we've got to bring it back to, there's a product strategy. Okay, sales, we want to sell everything. We want to sell to everyone, you know, whatever it takes. But we've got to be very respectful of the product strategy. So Lisa and I have a great working relationship. Our teams are very well integrated. You know, they would sit on my sales leadership meeting and sales team meeting every couple of weeks. And we keep that channel of kind of communication going. Okay, so we use Slack internally, you know, but we can very easily jump on a call, and it's like, look, maybe for a big deal, you know, where it's maybe a 6-figure deal that we want to go run down, there's things that maybe we have to deviate from, you know, the kind of stringent roadmap, if you like, and we need to think, okay, how can we go and take this deal down? And that's when the product team come into their own, because they really help to brainstorm. They really help to say, okay, look, maybe we can accelerate this feature. We can turn on, we can use them as a beta, but let's set the expectation very early with this prospect that whilst we don't do that now, or whilst, you know, it's still in build, if they're willing to go on the journey with us, like, we will go there with them. And we've won a lot of business that way. You know, we're proud of that fact, but we're always very open and honest with our prospects to say, look, you know, if we don't do something, we'll say that, but, you know, we can very easily engage with our product team to say, look, we think this is going to be a great logo that we need to take down. Like, let's chat about that. And they're very open to that. So there's a really nice tie-in with product and sales, plus our marketing teams, etc. But yeah, it's critical to have that open lines of communication. We can't just go off rogue and do this and say we'll do this. The customer experience is going to be awful, you know. So yeah.
So it's that partnership piece internally and externally to go on that journey.
Yeah,
very much so. And product management as an enabler of scale is a really, really strong enabler, because in a sense, and it's interesting, as in Ireland business model changes, increasingly a lot of the tech development is not done in Ireland. So our capability along the product management ladder probably needs to scale upwards and improve. And I know TU Dublin are doing very good work on product management in particular, but product management as an understanding of what's the customer job to be done? How are we going to do that better than anybody else, and deliver it consistently in partnership with sales and the rest of the organization? But that product management skill is a very, very finely balanced one, because it often comes initially from the founder, but when you go from 100 to 500 to 1,000 customers, product management is at the nexus of decisions to be made, and poor decisions that drag the organization down a particular path unnecessarily can delay scale. So I completely agree. That kind of head of revenue, head of sales, and head of product management, those two disciplines are really important.
Need to partner, and we often have those discussions internally about international selling at our product management suite of programs, and how there's so much overlap there, and it's increasingly obvious in terms of those two functions working together.
There's a really good example there, just of, like, you know, when to say no, you know, to help scale. It's like that, like, you know, we have to be kept honest by, you know, our product team to make sure that, like, no, we're not going to do that. And we just got to suck it up, and that's fine, you know, because actually it's helping.
Divert and focus.
Yeah,
great. Okay, we have another question here. Can you talk a bit about selling internationally from Ireland? At what point do you put boots on the ground in the new international market? What strategies would you suggest to de-risk as much as possible? Okay, so we've covered a few bits of them, but I suppose one of the points from that is, at what point maybe do you make that decision? Which is kind of probably an interesting one that you're grappling with at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, selling internationally. By the way, it's fun selling from Ireland into the US, okay? And that, again, that's our biggest market, right? Like, I'm not Irish, right? As you can probably tell by my accent, like, I'm English, right? And by the way, probably not English because I'm a Geordie, right? So that's up for debate, right? We'll talk about that later maybe. But actually, selling from Ireland, and obviously the core of the team is Irish. That's one of our unique selling points. Like, because the team will get on the phone with the prospect. And again, it's come through an inbound lead, and like, there could be an Irish surname there at the end of it, but they're obviously, however many generations from Irish removed, like, but it just stimulates a really good conversation, like, and they say, oh yeah, my grandfather was from Ireland and this. And so actually we take it as a, as a plus point that we're here in Ireland and we're selling to international markets, thousands of miles away. And there's a lot of common ground, like, and I think it helps us win, like in a lot of cases. So that's one thing. At what point do you put boots on the ground in a new international market? Again, we're fortunate enough that Brendan and Des had the foresight that, like, look, we want to build something special. Like, we've worked in a company like, say, WBT before, where they had seen same old, like, how do we create something really special like this, e-learning tech, and create our own LMS? Like, we know the pitfalls, we know what customers like, what they don't like. Let's go and do it ourselves. They had the foresight back then to say, we're going after the US market. That was a big decision. Being based here, they could have very easily said, do you know what, UK, that would be good enough. Like, let's get into the UK, and Ireland, let's, like, well, obviously we're here. But they made the decision to go pretty big and go to the US. And like I said, a couple of times, it's 70% of our revenues now. Like, that was a risky move. Like, that was a big move. Nobody over there in the US. The first hire LearnerPod made was a customer success manager. It wasn't a salesperson. It was customer success, to make sure that when Brendan actually sold something, we could support them really, really well. And now we have a wonderful team of customer success with a great success leader over there, based in Utah, and they're dotted around all over the US. And we have to, because that's where our customers are. So, but from a sales perspective, we're here selling to the US, like, and I think we're at the inflection point now when it comes to, we're building critical mass here. It's getting tougher and tougher to be able to sell to a candidate, hey, look, come on to LearnerPod. We've got, great culture, great organization. But by the way, you could be working like until 10 o'clock, this evening, because like you've got a demo to do, or you've got a discovery call to do, and they're on West Coast, like, so that becomes difficult. And just with again, like I talked about the talent war in Dublin, like we got to go and make that move now and put boots on the ground, like in the US. The other thing is, when it comes to the EMEA markets, because that might be relevant for a lot of people on the call here, but like, language is a big thing. And here in Ireland, like, we've done very, very well in terms of being able to, hire languages, or salespeople with languages. This is in Qualtrics, by the way. We haven't really gone proactively after the EMEA market yet with LearnerPod, but when we do, I'll hire languages here in Ireland as much as I can. And then there'll be a time when actually we need to go into the Benelux, or we need to go into the Nordics, and we need to hire locally that language, or France or Germany, let's say. But for now, we can service all of the English speaking markets, let's say, with Indigenous Irish people, Middle East, Africa, Northern Europe. That's the norm, like, in tech. So we can do very well from that. But I think, certainly as we scale, we got to go put boots on the ground. Like, that time is coming now. Yeah.
Great. Paul, anything to add to that one, or?
No, I think that covers it really well. The only small addition, and really dependent on what stage you're at, is that jumping back to the digital point, that there's a lot of validation can be done before that hire. So if you're going to be at a stage where you need to hire, well, build pipeline, build awareness, have a lot of the fundamentals in place. Don't expect that you're going to hire somebody in New York City or San Francisco that's going to come with the answers in the playbook to sort out all of your stuff. Do the foundations, do the basics, and validate the market as much as possible before making that hire, because a bad hire in the US could, when you put opportunity cost and hiring costs and salaries and all the rest, it could be a $500,000 plus cost fee. So just be very careful.
So lay the foundations for success for them in terms of before you put them in place. Great. I'm not sure if we have any more questions there. I think we're nearly out of time. folks, I'd like to thank both of you. I think it's been a really fascinating conversation. It's great, Paul, your experience of working with a multitude of Irish companies and helping them scale, and Rob, your experience in working, and particularly with Learn Upon as a really crucial success story, has been great, and one that we had a lot of interest in this evening. A lot of people wanted to hear that story, so I think that's great. Thanks to everyone on the call for coming along this evening, and thanks for those of you who submitted questions in advance. We have picked 3 questions from Adrian Byrne, Patrick Thorikins, and Paul Foley. So we'll be in touch with you folks to send you a nice goodie bag with a copy of a book, some TU Dublin branded goodies, some Learn Upon goodies, and so on. So thanks for those great questions in advance. I'd like to thank everyone again for coming along this evening, and invite you to come along to our future Connected Seminar Series events. We have a Connected Tech event launching next week, and we're going to be promoting that from tomorrow on, where you'll see 6 weeks of topics around immersive technologies, AI, blockchain, Internet of Things, digital transformation, and so on. So it's going to be a really interesting series with a lot of expert speakers. So do come along to some of those events and bring colleagues along too. So have a great evening. Thanks again to Paul and Rob, and we'll see you at our next event. Thank you.